You know, Dax Shepard and Kristen Bell, right? They've kind of built this whole brand on being Hollywood's most real couple. I mean, they're famous for being brutally honest about everything: marriage counseling, fights, addiction, you name it. But what happens when that openness starts to make people, well, really uncomfortable? Because according to a lot of critics, their version of honesty has crossed a line into territory that's not just cringy, but pretty problematic. So yeah, let's get into it. And wow, this quote from Kristen Bell on a talk show, this is the perfect place to start. It just captures the entire dynamic we're talking about. If you're a fan, you hear that and think, okay, that's just some dark, edgy humor from a couple that's super secure. But if you're a critic, you hear that and see a massive red flag that's being passed off as a joke. And that right there is the fundamental tension that defines their whole public image. Okay, so this really sets up our first big idea: this huge gap between the couple goals image they put out there and the pretty troubling reality that critics are pointing to in their stories and public comments. This slide, I mean, it really lays out the whole paradox. It's fascinating how the exact same behavior can be seen in two completely opposite ways. So, what their brand is selling as honest and relatable, a lot of other people are calling oversharing and just plain inappropriate. What they frame as brave, open communication, insiders apparently call constant bickering. And that modern and secure relationship vibe they push is often called out for its use of disrespectful joking, especially about some really, really serious topics. And here's a perfect and honestly pretty jarring example. This is a direct quote from Dax Shepard, and it was delivered as a punchline. The source material we're looking at highlights this as part of a pattern of making jokes about domestic violence, which for a lot of people isn't just not funny, it's genuinely alarming. And that pattern goes way beyond just the jokes. Friends have reportedly said these two argue all the time, even right in front of their guests. They once literally documented a fight on Instagram for millions of followers to watch. Then you've got Kristen Bell's public take on cheating, who cares to be honest, and Dax's repeated, almost performative excitement about watching his wife film romantic scenes. So it begs the question, right? Where do you draw the line between being radically honest and just recklessly oversharing? Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about his podcast, Armchair Expert. This is where Dax is really in his element. You know, long form, totally unfiltered conversations. But it's also a place that has stirred up a ton of controversy. And this is where the source material suggests that his conversational style doesn't just push envelopes, it crosses boundaries. The critique isn't just that he's open. It's that there's a pattern of honor behavior that seems to put his guests, and even his co-host, in really awkward, uncomfortable positions over and over again. And this slide just gives you a taste of the huge range of these incidents. You've got his really intense sexualizing of male guests like Brad Pitt and Shawn Mendes. There was an episode where he admitted to having an obsession with the 26-year-old singer Sabrina Carpenter, and then he pushed another guest who was already in a relationship to go after her. And maybe the most controversial moment of all was a conversation with Ashton Kutcher where they seemed to express empathy for certain types of online predators, which, as you can imagine, caused a massive backlash. So to really get what's going on here, the source brings up this psychological concept called weaponized insecurity. This isn't just about feeling down on yourself. It's about using those self-deprecating comments as a strategy to basically hijack a conversation. It makes everyone else stop what they're doing and rush to comfort and reassure you. It's a way of controlling the room by making everyone manage your feelings. And boom, here it is in action. See what he's doing here? By saying this, he completely stops the natural flow of conversation and makes it all about him. It forces his wife and his guests to immediately jump in and go, no, Dax, you're amazing. So he gets to look all vulnerable, but really, he's the one who's completely steering the emotional direction of the conversation. Is that vulnerability? Or is it a very clever form of control? And this whole theme of pushing boundaries and needing control, well, it also shows up in another really sensitive area: his comments about his two young daughters. And this is where a lot of critics say a line is just definitively crossed. Just imagine you're 11 years old and your dad says this to you. The source doesn't see this as some thoughtful, forward-thinking parenting. It's framed as planting a seed of anxiety about biological clocks and fertility in a kid who should be thinking about, being a kid. It feels like he's projecting his own grown-up anxieties directly onto his daughter. And then you have this. When he was asked where he'd be okay with his daughters eventually being intimate with partners, this was his answer. Again, what he might think is a real or modern take on parenting, a lot of people just found flat out creepy and a super invasive comment about his young daughter's future private lives. Now look, you absolutely cannot have a real conversation about Dax Shepard's behavior without talking about his very public battle with addiction. It's crucial context. But, and the source is really clear on this, it's context, not an excuse.
16. Let that number just sink in for a second. 16 years. That's how long Dax Shepard was sober before he publicly shared that he had relapsed on painkillers after a motorcycle accident. It just really speaks to how long and how difficult his recovery journey has been.
And to really get a picture of how deep his past struggles were, you just have to hear this story. He was supposed to be on Conan O'Brien's show, a huge deal. He literally woke up from a blackout in his hotel room. He rushed to the show, was a complete mess, couldn't remember any of the stories he was supposed to tell, and even broke a coffee table on set. He ended up getting banned from the show for years. It's just a really stark reminder of the kind of damage his addiction was causing in his life and career. And the source points out that even in recovery, there have been some questionable calls. It tells this story about how Shepard almost got into a fistfight at an AA meeting with another actor, Eric Dane. Now, the issue wasn't just the fight itself. It's that Shepard later went on his podcast and broke the #1 rule of Alcoholics Anonymous, anonymity, by publicly naming Eric Dane. So, after all of that, where do we land? It really brings us back to that central question. How are we supposed to make sense of all this behavior? Is Dax Shepard just a champion of being authentic? Or is there something genuinely alarming going on here? So let's just break down the two competing ideas. On one side, you've got the radical honesty argument. In this view, all his talk about Kristen's co-stars, that's just a secure way to deal with jealousy. Sharing his struggles publicly, that's just him processing things out in the open. Being real about his flaws is just that, being real. But then you have the deep insecurity argument. And from this perspective, the same behaviors are seen as him overcompensating. Sharing his struggles is really about controlling the story, and being real is actually a tactic to make everybody else around him manage his emotions for him. And this is really the core idea that the source lands on. It tries to explain the why behind all of it. It suggests that everything, the uncomfortable jokes, the constant oversharing, the weaponized insecurity, all of it stems from this deep-seated need to control things that are, at the end of the day, completely uncontrollable. Ultimately, this whole deep dive leaves us with a question that's way bigger than just one celebrity couple. In this culture we live in that prizes authenticity and total transparency above almost everything else, we really have to ask ourselves, how do we know when we've actually crossed the line? When does sharing stop being brave and start being genuinely harmful, not just to other people, but maybe even to ourselves?